Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
It was hot. The jungle breathed decay and fear. 5 blue warriors glided through the thicket like shadows. Their target, a human. 1 remaining, unarmed, like bait. Human, hissed Rhea. Walking, alone. Her second-in-command, Vorin, crept forward to her position. Trap? He asked, scanning the surrounding area with his own sensors. Rhea shook her head, her expression twisting into something between amusement and contempt. The sensors provided more detail now. A solitary male human, moving slowly through the undergrowth. No weapons detected, no communications equipment, just flesh and bone, trudging through the jungle. Look at that, she said, gesturing forward as the human came into view through a gap in the vegetation. He's not even running. The human was a pitiful sight, barefoot, clothes reduced to tattered rags that clung to his thin frame. His movements were cautious but steady, save for a slight limp that favored his left leg. Dirt streaked his exposed skin, and his dark hair hung in matted clumps. What if it's bait? Vorin's voice carried the wariness that had kept their squad alive through countless engagements. Rhea considered this briefly before dismissing it with a flick of her wrist. No, that's just a slow human, left behind by the war. She studied him for a moment longer, then stepped into the clearing, her squad following cautiously behind her. The human stopped, not surprised, not frightened, just waiting. Too slow, she said loudly, making sure her voice carried. Even if we gave you a head start, you couldn't dodge. The human shrugged casually. What if I close my eyes? It's actually easier that way. Several soldiers chuckled at this apparent bravado. Rhea's lips curled into a cruel smile. She nodded. 12 arrows, simultaneously. If you survive, I'll admit you're not completely useless. The human moved to the center of the small clearing, turning to face them. He closed his eyes and raised his arms slightly to his sides, as if feeling the wind. Ready? Rhea asked, signaling her squad to prepare their dart bows. Always, the human replied calmly. At her command, 12 training arrows, each with blunt tips designed to stun rather than kill, flew from their bows. The human remained motionless for a split second. Then, a step to the side, a half turn, a slight tilt of his head. One movement flowing into the next, minimal and precise. Every single arrow missed. When he opened his eyes, no one was laughing. The squad stood frozen, weapons still raised, expressions shifting from amusement to confusion to unease. Only Rhea remained composed, though her jaw had tightened visibly. She stared at him, eyes narrowed. Repeat it, she whispered. You were already laughing, he replied softly. Don't feel like it anymore? A cruel smile played across her lips as an idea formed. Watch this, she whispered to her squad. With practiced efficiency, she withdrew her dart bow, a non-lethal weapon they often use for training exercises or humiliation. Captain, Vorin began, but fell silent as Rhea raised the weapon. The human continued his slow advance, unaware of the 5 predators watching his every move, or so they thought. Rhea lined up her shot, calculated for wind resistance and trajectory, and fired the first arrow. It sailed through the air with a soft whistle, perfectly aimed at the human's right shoulder. Not enough to cause serious damage, but enough to sting and terrify. Just as the dart was about to strike, the human tilted his body slightly to the left. The projectile missed by centimeters. Rhea frowned, adjusting her aim. Perhaps a fluke. She fired again, this time aiming for his left thigh. Again the human shifted, this time leaning right, letting the dart pass harmlessly by. Something cold settled in Rhea's stomach, but pride compelled her forward. One after another, she fired the remaining 10 darts, each from a different angle, each with lethal precision had she chosen to make them so. And one by one, the human avoided them all. The final dart flew true toward the center of the human's back. He simply closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped aside as if he had known exactly where it would be. The squad remained frozen in stunned silence as the human continued on his way, disappearing into the dense vegetation without so much as a backward glance. That's... Kieran, the youngest of the squad, struggled to find words. That's not possible. It's just reflex, Rhea said, but the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her. No, Vorin said quietly. That wasn't reflex. Back at the forward operating base, Rhea couldn't shake the encounter from her mind. She had downloaded the visual feed from her sensors to review the footage again and again, analyzing every frame, every movement. The evidence was undeniable. The human hadn't simply reacted to the sound or sight of the darts. His movements had begun before the darts were even within range of detection by ordinary human senses. He hadn't dodged them. He had anticipated them. "You're still watching that?" Voren entered the small analysis chamber where Rhea had been sequestered for hours. "Look at this," she said, not bothering to acknowledge his presence otherwise. She gestured to the holographic display where the footage played in slow motion. "Frame by frame, his muscles begin to shift before the dart even leaves my weapon." Voren leaned in, his brow furrowing as he studied the image. "That's unsettling." "It's fascinating," Rhea corrected. "I've never seen anything like it." "The others are talking," Voren said cautiously. "There are rumors about humans who survived the initial assault on the Western Front." Rhea turned to face him fully now. "What rumors?" "They say some of them were exposed to our nerve gas, the experimental batches. Most died, but a few." He trailed off, his gaze returning to the frozen image of the human's face, eyes closed, expression serene as he avoided certain injury. "They say some went blind from it." "Blind," Rhea repeated. The word hung in the air between them. "So he didn't dodge," Voren concluded. "He felt." Long after Voren had left, Rhea remained, staring at the final frame of the recording, the human disappearing into the thick foliage, moving with a certainty that seemed impossible for someone navigating by sight, let alone someone potentially blind. She made her decision then. Protocol be damned. She would return to the sector, not as a hunter this time, but as an observer. 3 days later, Rhea led her squad back into the jungle. Officially, they were conducting a standard sweep of the area, checking for any human resistance that might have slipped through during the initial purge. Unofficially, Rhea had her own agenda. "We'll split into 2 groups," she announced once they were deep enough into the sector. "Voren, take Chiron and Mila east. Tanis and I will cover the western quadrant." Voren's expression suggested he understood there was more to her plan, but he simply nodded. "Rendezvous at sunset?" "Affirmative," Rhea confirmed. "Standard communication protocols. Report anything unusual immediately." As the others moved off, Tanis looked to Rhea expectantly. "Orders, Captain." "Set up a perimeter 300 meters in that direction." She pointed northwest. "I'm going to scout ahead alone. Regulations state—" "I know the regulations," Rhea cut him off. "This is my call. Maintain position and alert me if anything approaches." Reluctantly, Tanis complied, and Rhea soon found herself alone among the dense vegetation. She moved silently, each step carefully placed, her senses heightened. This time she wasn't hunting, she was searching. Hours passed with no sign of the human. The jungle grew darker as the day waned, shadows lengthening beneath the canopy. Rhea was about to return to Tanis when she noticed something. A subtle shift in the ambient sounds around her. It wasn't a silencing, as would happen if a large predator were moving through the area. Rather, it was a change in the rhythm, as if the jungle itself were breathing differently. She froze, her hand instinctively moving to her sidearm. "Can you hear me?" she whispered into the gathering darkness. For a moment there was nothing but the usual symphony of insects and distant calls of avian creatures. Then from somewhere both impossibly close and indeterminately distant, "Louder than you hear yourself." The voice was male, rough from disuse, but distinctly human. Rhea turned slowly, scanning her surroundings but could detect no movement, no heat signature. "Show yourself," she commanded, though her voice lacked its usual authority. "Why?" came the reply. "You see too much already, and understand too little." Rhea swallowed, finding her throat unexpectedly dry. "You dodged my darts." A soft sound, something between a chuckle and a sigh, emanated from the shadows. "Is that what brings you back? Wounded pride?" "Curiosity," she corrected. "How long have you been out here?" 6 months, he answered. "Since the fall." "You're blind," Rhea stated, remembering Voren's rumors. "Sight's not everything," the voice replied, now seeming to come from a different direction entirely. "When you lose it, you start truly seeing." Rhea took a step toward where she thought the voice originated, but found nothing. "What does that mean?" "It means the world is more than light reflecting off surfaces," he explained. "It's vibration, pressure, scent, heat, electrical fields. When you stop relying on your eyes, everything else becomes clearer. Why are you telling me this? Rhea asked. I'm your enemy. Are you? There was genuine curiosity in his tone. You didn't fire a second volley. You came back alone. You're speaking instead of shooting. Before Rhea could respond, the human spoke again, his voice suddenly urgent. A patrol is coming. 2 of yours from the east. Rhea checked her scanner. Nothing. How could you possibly... Go, he interrupted. Take 3 steps forward, then turn right. Follow that path. It will lead you back to where you need to be. Instinct told her to ignore him, to trust her own training and equipment. But something deeper, curiosity perhaps, or something she couldn't yet name, compelled her forward. 3 steps, then a right turn onto a barely visible trail she hadn't noticed before. She walked for several minutes before emerging onto a familiar path, the one that would lead her back to Tanis. Looking back, she couldn't identify the trail she had just traveled. It was as if it had never existed. Just as she turned to continue, her communicator chirped. Captain, Voron's voice came through. We've completed our sweep and are heading to the rendezvous point. Acknowledged, she replied automatically. As she made her way back to Tanis, Rhea couldn't shake the feeling that she had been guided, maneuvered by someone who knew the jungle not just by sight, but by some deeper connection. The next day brought unexpected challenges. Heavy rains had swollen the river that cut through the sector, washing away parts of the primitive infrastructure left behind by the human settlers. The squad found themselves forced to cross a dilapidated bridge spanning a deep ravine. Structure integrity is compromised, Tanis reported after scanning the bridge. It will hold for single-file crossing, but we should move quickly. Rhea nodded. Voron, take point. Tanis, you're next, then Mila and Chiron. I'll bring up the rear. One by one, they began the crossing. The bridge swayed ominously beneath their weight, ancient metal groaning in protest. Halfway across, a loud crack split the air. Move! Rhea shouted, but it was too late. The bridge gave way beneath them, tearing apart in a cacophony of snapping cables and splintering wood. Rhea lunged forward, managing to grasp a still intact section of railing as the world fell away beneath her feet. The others had made it across, but she was left dangling over the ravine, the raging river far below. Captain! Voron's shout barely reached her over the roar of the water and the creaking of the failing structure. Stay back, she called. The whole thing is going. She tried to activate her emergency beacon, but the impact had damaged her equipment. No communications, no backup. Her grip was slipping, fingers numbing from the strain and the cold metal. Just as her strength began to fail, something unexpected happened. A hand reached up from below, not from her team on the other side, but from the ravine itself. A human hand grasping her wrist with surprising strength. Looking down, she saw him, the blind human, perched on a narrow ledge she hadn't noticed. His face turned up toward her, though his eyes remained closed. Let go, he said, his voice calm and steady. I've got you. Every instinct screamed against trusting an enemy, yet what choice did she have? Rhea released her grip on the railing and felt herself being lowered, slowly and precisely, onto the ledge beside him. For a moment, they stood there in precarious balance, the bridge continuing to break apart above them, her squad shouting frantically from the far side. This way, he said, guiding her along the ledge toward a narrow path cut into the ravine wall. You were nearby the whole time? Rhea asked as they made their way carefully down the path. You're loud, he replied simply. I knew you'd fall before the bridge did. The realization struck her then. You were waiting for this. You knew it would happen. He didn't answer directly, continuing to lead her down until they reached solid ground at the bottom of the ravine, well away from the rushing water. Why help me? She finally asked. After what my people have done to yours. After what I tried to do to you. He paused then, turning to face her, though his gaze remained unfocused. You were the first who didn't shoot a second arrow. Before she could respond, he cocked his head slightly as if listening to something far away. Your team is moving along the ridge, trying to find a way down to you. They'll be here soon. He began to move away, back toward the jungle. Wait, Rhea called after him. Your name. At least tell me your name. He hesitated then. Eli. My name is Eli. And then he was gone, disappearing into the undergrowth with the same certainty she had witnessed before, moving as if darkness and light made no difference to his navigation. Minutes later, Voron and the others found her. their relief palpable. "How did you survive that fall?" Kieran asked, wide-eyed. Rhea looked back toward where Eli had vanished. "I had help," she said simply. "Help? From who?" Voren pressed. But Rhea just shook her head. "Let's get moving. We need to find another way across." That night at camp, Rhea couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eli's face. Serene, confident, unseeing, yet somehow all-seeing. She replayed their encounters in her mind, trying to make sense of what she had witnessed. She sat up, looking at Eli's still form across the small fire they had risked building. "You hear everything, even when you sleep, don't you?" she whispered, not expecting an answer. "And I've stopped hearing even myself." The realization struck her with unexpected force. How long had she been following orders without question? How many missions had she completed without considering their purpose or consequence? "I'm not a hero," she continued in a half-whisper. "I just don't want someone to shoot at you again because of my uniform." Her training told her to report everything. The human survivor with inexplicable abilities, his knowledge of their movements, his intervention that had saved her life. Protocol demanded it, but something held her back. Reporting him would mean hunting him, capturing him, studying him like a specimen, or worse. Before dawn, she made her decision. Breaking protocol, she left the camp alone, moving through the pre-dawn darkness toward the ravine where they had parted. She wasn't sure what she expected, certainly not to find him waiting. Yet as she approached the area, that same subtle shift in the jungle's rhythm alerted her to his presence. "You came back," he said from somewhere to her left. "I needed answers," she replied, turning toward his voice. He emerged from the shadows, moving with that uncanny certainty. "What questions do you have that are worth risking your position for? How did you know the bridge would collapse? How did you know where I would fall? How do you move through this jungle like you can see when clearly you cannot?" Eli smiled slightly. "Those are a lot of questions about how and none about why." "Fine," Rhea said, frustration edging into her voice. "Why help me? Why not let me fall? One less enemy to worry about." "Because you're not my enemy," he said simply. "Not anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means I've been watching you watching me. You're curious, different from the others. You question." Rhea felt exposed suddenly, as if this blind human could see through her carefully constructed facade to something she herself had barely acknowledged. "I follow orders." "Until you don't," he countered. "Like now." Before she could respond, his head tilted slightly. That same listening posture she had noticed before. "Someone's coming," he said urgently. Rhea checked her scanner. Nothing. But she had learned not to dismiss his warnings. "Who?" "Your people. Many of them. Armed. They're not here for reconnaissance." A cold dread settled in her stomach. "How do you know?" "Their movements. Their weapons. The electromagnetic fields from their equipment." He paused. "They're looking for you." Understanding dawned on her. "They're tracking me. They know I left camp." "It's worse than that," Eli said. "They've disabled your neural link. They think you're compromised." Rhea's hand flew to the small implant at the base of her skull, the standard-issue neural connector that linked her to the squad network. It was cold, inactive. Panic rose in her throat. A disabled link meant only one thing. She had been deemed a security risk. "They abandoned me," she whispered. Eli reached out, his hand finding her arm with unerring accuracy. "We need to move. Now." He led her deeper into the jungle, away from the approaching forces, navigating through the dense undergrowth with impossible ease. They moved in silence for what felt like hours, the terrain growing increasingly difficult. Finally, they reached what appeared to be an old drainage pipe, partially concealed by vegetation. "Through here," Eli instructed. "It leads to an underground system the initial surveys missed. We'll be safer there." Rhea hesitated, looking back the way they had come. "Why are you helping me again?" "You're in exile now," he said simply. "I always was," she replied, surprising herself with the admission. "I just used to like it." The drainage system opened into a vast network of tunnels and chambers, remnants of the human infrastructure that had once supported a thriving colony. Eli navigated the darkness with the same confidence he showed above ground, leading Rhea through the labyrinth until they reached a junction of 3 corridors. As they passed through a narrow passage, Rhea's light caught something on the floor. Dark stains splashed across the metal grating. She knelt down, running her fingers over the surface. Blood, she said quietly. Human blood. Dried. Not more than a week old. Eli paused, his head tilted as if listening to the walls themselves. There were others here. A few meters ahead, Rhea spotted something else. A discarded bandage, crusted with more dried blood. She picked it up cautiously. Military-grade antiseptic, she noted, catching the faint chemical smell. This wasn't from a civilian. As they continued, her light swept across the wall, revealing a message scratched into the metal with what must have been a knife or some other sharp implement. The words were in human language, carved deep and deliberate. Still breathing, still blind. Still free. Next to it was a crude drawing of an eye with a line struck through it, and beneath that, a series of dots and dashes that Rhea recognized as an old human communication code. Morse code, she murmured, studying the pattern. I can't read it. Eli ran his fingers over the markings. It says we see in darkness. It's a message for others like me. Others? Rhea looked at him sharply. There are more with your abilities. The gas affected each person differently, Eli explained. Some died, some went blind, some developed other senses. We found each other for a time, before we were scattered. You've been here before, she asked, studying his expression. No, he replied, his fingers still tracing the letters. But I know who left this, or at least what they were. Could be a trap, Rhea said, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. Or a message of hope, Eli countered. Either way, we should keep moving. They proceeded deeper into the system, eventually reaching what appeared to be an abandoned communication station. You knew this was here? Rhea asked, looking around at the relatively intact equipment. No, Eli replied with a slight smile. Just guessing. He moved to the console, his fingers finding the controls with uncanny precision. We can rest here, Eli said, his movements precise and familiar. You know how to operate this? Rhea asked, watching as he activated systems with practiced ease. I was a communications specialist before the invasion, he explained. Before I lost my sight. Rhea approached cautiously, studying the ancient human technology. Can they track us here? Not if I shut down the beacon, Eli said, his fingers dancing across the controls. But we don't have much time. A strike drone unit is likely already en route to this location. How could they know about this place? They don't, he said grimly. But they'll scan for energy signatures, and powering up these systems will have registered. Rhea considered their options. Running seemed futile. Fighting a drone unit with their limited resources was suicide. Unless... I have an idea, she said. You stay here in the station. Eli's head tilted curiously. And you? I draw them out, lead them away from here, make them think I'm alone. They'll kill you, Eli stated flatly. Not if you kill them first, Rhea countered. You can track them without seeing them, right? Sense their movements, their positions. A slow understanding dawned on Eli's face. You want me to be the blind hunter while you're the bait? Exactly. For a long moment he was silent, considering. Then, it might work, but it's dangerous. More dangerous than doing nothing? Rhea asked. Eli's lips quirked in a small smile. Point taken. He moved to a wall panel and retrieved something, a slender blade that gleamed dully in the low light. I'll need this. Rhea nodded, drawing her own sidearm. I'll give you 10 minutes to position yourself, then I'll move topside and make some noise. Be careful, Eli warned. These aren't ordinary drones. They're adaptable learning systems. So am I, Rhea replied with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. 10 minutes later, Rhea emerged from the underground facility into the humid jungle air. The sun had risen, casting dappled light through the canopy. She moved deliberately, making no attempt to conceal her passage through the undergrowth. It didn't take long for the first sign of pursuit to appear, a faint buzzing on the edge of hearing, growing steadily louder. Strike drones, just as Eli had predicted. Rhea quickened her pace, heading toward a small clearing she had noted during their approach. Open ground would make her more visible, more vulnerable. Perfect bait. The first drone appeared as she reached the clearing's edge, a sleek metallic construct hovering at eye level, its sensors focused directly on her. Two more emerged from the canopy seconds later, flanking the first. Rhea raised her weapon, firing a controlled burst that struck the lead drone's outer casing without causing significant damage. It was enough, however, to trigger their pursuit protocols. She turned and ran, leading them back toward the communications station, ducking and weaving through the trees to slow their advance without losing them entirely. As she neared the station entrance, she dove for cover, rolling behind a fallen log as the drones closed in. They hovered at the edge of the clearing, sensors scanning methodically for their target. From the shadows of the station entrance, a figure moved, so quickly it was almost imperceptible. Eli, blade in hand, silent as death itself. The first drone never registered his presence. His blade found a seam in its armor, severing critical components. It dropped from the air with a soft whir of failing systems. The remaining drones immediately shifted focus, sensors sweeping for this new threat. But Eli was already moving, using the sounds of their propulsion systems to track their positions perfectly. He ducked beneath the second drone's defensive protocols, his movements fluid and precise, and disabled it with a single upward thrust of his blade. The third drone, apparently learning from its companion's failures, retreated to a higher position, out of immediate reach. It released a small projectile, a hunter-seeker, designed to track and eliminate with extreme prejudice. "Eli! Above you!" Rhea shouted, emerging from her cover with weapon raised. But Eli had already sensed the threat. He dropped flat as the hunter-seeker passed overhead, then rolled to his feet, tracking its movement by sound alone. As it circled back for another pass, he flipped his blade, grasping it by the tip, and with a fluid motion, threw it directly into the hunter-seeker's path. The blade struck true, sending the projectile spiraling into the trunk of a nearby tree, where it detonated harmlessly. Taking advantage of the distraction, Rhea fired on the remaining drone, her shots more precise now that she wasn't merely playing the role of bait. The drone's armor cracked under the sustained fire, and it faltered, losing altitude before Eli delivered the final blow, leaping to catch it as it descended and driving his recovered blade into its central processing unit. Silence fell over the clearing as the last drone crashed to the ground. Eli stood among the wreckage, breathing heavily but otherwise unharmed. "That was..." Rhea struggled to find the right words. "Impressive." Eli turned toward her voice, his expression serious. "There will be more. We need to move." "Where?" Rhea asked. "They'll be monitoring all routes off-planet." "I know a place," Eli said, "but first we need to make sure they can't track us." He knelt beside one of the fallen drones, fingers exploring its damaged casing, until he found what he was looking for. A small tracking beacon, still active despite the drone's destruction. "Hold out your arm, Honin," he instructed Rhea. When she complied, he pressed the beacon against her forearm, directly over her subcutaneous ID chip, standard issue for all military personnel. A sharp pain lanced through her arm as the beacon interfaced with her chip, corrupting its data. "Now they can't track you by your personal identifier," Eli explained. "But we still need to move quickly." They traveled for days, avoiding populated areas and patrol routes with Eli's uncanny ability to sense approaching danger long before it arrived. Rhea found herself relying on him more and more, not just for navigation, but for survival itself. One evening, as they made camp in the hollow trunk of a massive fallen tree, Rhea finally voiced the realization that had been building within her. "I used to be proud of being fast," she admitted, watching Eli as he prepared a small meal from plants he had gathered. "Fast reactions, fast decisions, fast promotions. I thought that made me a better hunter, a better soldier." Eli paused in his work, head tilted toward her voice. "But you survived because you didn't rush," she continued. "You waited, observed, understood. I wasn't a hunter at all. I was bait, moving so quickly I never saw the trap I was in." Eli said nothing, resuming his methodical preparation of their meal. "Why are you still here?" Rhea asked after a long silence. "You could have left me behind a dozen times, found somewhere safer." "Because you haven't left yet," he replied simply. The answer caught her off guard. "What does that mean?" Eli handed her a portion of the prepared food before responding. "It means we're both learning something from each other. You're learning to slow down, to sense rather than just see, and I'm remembering what it's like to not be alone." Rhea considered this as they ate in companionable silence. For the first time since her exile, she felt a strange sense of peace, not the cold detachment she had cultivated as a soldier, but something warmer, more genuine. The next day brought new challenges. They needed to cross a vast open plain to reach the evacuation route Eli had spoken of. Under normal circumstances, such terrain would be suicide for fugitives. No cover, no concealment, exposed to aerial surveillance. But as a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the landscape in an impenetrable white shroud, Eli saw opportunity where Rhea saw only blindness. "Perfect," he said, his face turned toward the wall of mist. "We can cross now." "I can't see 5 meters in that," Rhea protested. Eli smiled. "Then for once we're on equal footing. Follow me. Step where I step. No words once we enter the fog." With that, he moved forward into the mist, and Rhea had no choice but to follow. Inside the fog, the world disappeared. Sound became muffled, directionless. Humidity clung to Rhea's skin, condensing on her face and arms. She could barely make out Eli's form ahead of her, a darker shadow in the uniform whiteness. Suddenly nearby, a sound as if someone was scratching with claws on stone. Rhea stopped. Eli didn't change his pace. "What was that?" she whispered, hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. "Don't look there," Eli replied softly. "It doesn't see you." A low growl emanated from somewhere to their right, followed by a wet, slithering sound. Rhea's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to keep moving, eyes locked on Eli's back. Then, without warning, the fog thickened. Eli's silhouette faded, becoming indistinct, then gone entirely. "Eli," she whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. No answer. She moved forward cautiously, trying to follow the direction she'd last seen him heading. The fog swirled around her, playing tricks with perspective and distance. Then, a figure, perhaps 20 meters ahead. "Eli!" she called, relief flooding through her. The figure turned slightly, its outline familiar in the mist. She quickened her pace, closing the distance. But as she drew nearer, something felt wrong. The movement wasn't fluid like Eli's. It was jerky, unnatural, and it seemed taller. Rhea slowed, raising her weapon. The figure turned fully toward her now, and a cold dread washed over her. Where a face should have been was only smooth, featureless skin, stretched taut over a skull-like form. Its arms hung too long, fingers extending into curved talons. Her training took over, and she sighted down her weapon, finger tightening on the trigger. "Not that way," Eli's voice directly behind her. She spun, finding him standing mere centimeters away. "What is that thing?" she hissed, gesturing toward the figure which had begun moving toward them. "Mutation from the war." Eli took her arm, guiding her in a different direction. They hunt by sound and heat. The fog is their territory. As they moved away, Rhea glanced back. The creature had stopped, its head weaving from side to side as if tasting the air. Then it turned away, disappearing back into the whiteness. "How did you find me?" she asked when they were far enough away. "You breathe differently when you're afraid," Eli replied. "I followed that." After that close encounter, Rhea focused entirely on his footsteps, placing her feet exactly where his had been. For the first time, she truly understood what he had meant about seeing without sight. Here, in this formless void, her eyes were useless. All that mattered was sound, touch, the feel of the ground beneath her feet. Hours passed in this strange procession. Occasionally, Eli would stop, head tilted in that now familiar listening posture, before changing direction slightly. Rhea realized he was avoiding something, perhaps the mutated scavengers he had warned her about, creatures that had adapted to the post-war environment in horrifying ways. The fog began to thin as they neared the plain's edge, revealing a rocky escarpment ahead. As they climbed, Rhea's foot slipped on the wet stone. She felt herself falling backward, a cry escaping her lips before she could suppress it. Then impossibly fast, Eli's hand closed around her wrist, arresting her fall. He pulled her up beside him, his grip strong and sure. "Thank you," she whispered, heart pounding from the near miss. Eli nodded once, then continued climbing. They reached a small cave as darkness fell, the fog still clinging to the lowlands behind them. Inside, sheltered from the elements and potential pursuers, they finally allowed themselves to rest. "How did you know where to go?" Rhea asked, huddled against the cave wall. "In the fog, I mean. There were no landmarks, no visual cues." "The ground tells a story if you listen," Eli explained. "Different densities, different compositions make different sounds underfoot. The air currents shift around obstacles. Scents linger in low spots. Once you stop relying on your eyes, the world reveals itself in other ways." He fell silent for a moment, his face turned toward the cave entrance. "You think I'm just a blind soldier?" he said quietly. But every time I wake up, I'm afraid that I'll hear the voices of the dead again. The admission caught Rhea off guard. It was the first crack in his stoic demeanor, a glimpse of vulnerability she hadn't expected. The voices of the dead? When the gas took my sight, it opened something else. For weeks I heard them, everyone who died in our sector, their last thoughts, their fear, their confusion. His voice had grown softer. Sometimes they still come back in dreams. Rhea contemplated this, recalling how utterly lost she had felt in the fog. I've never felt so helpless. Yet you followed me, Eli observed, without question, without sight. I had no choice. There's always a choice. Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft patter of rain that had begun to fall outside. Finally, Rhea asked the question that had been building since their first encounter. Are you still human? Eli's expression remained impassive. Are you still a warrior? The question struck deeper than Rhea expected. Was she? She had abandoned her post, her people, her mission. She was aiding an enemy, a target she had once tried to humiliate and harm. I'm the one who looks but doesn't see, she admitted. You're the one who's blind, but leads. Eli's hand found hers in the darkness, a gentle touch that startled her with its warmth. Then perhaps we're both becoming something different than what we were. 2 days later, they reached the evacuation route, an ancient landing zone used during the initial human colonization, now long abandoned. According to Eli, it wasn't on any current maps, military or civilian. It represented their best chance at disappearing completely. But as they approached the clearing where the landing zone was located, Eli suddenly froze. What is it? Rhea whispered, instantly alert. They're here, he said, his voice tight. A full tactical unit, heavy weapons. They've been waiting. Rhea's heart sank. How did they find this place? They didn't, Eli replied grimly. They found us. We've been tracked since the drone attack. Understanding dawned on Rhea. The beacon you used to corrupt my ID chip. It wasn't just a tracker. It was a transmitter. They've been following our route, anticipating our destination. Eli's expression hardened. We need to change plans. But it was too late. A voice boomed across the clearing, amplified by tactical speakers. Squad Leader Rhea, you are ordered to surrender immediately. The human prisoner will be taken into custody. Compliance will be rewarded with leniency. Rhea recognized the voice. Commander Varric, her former superior, known for his ruthless efficiency and strict adherence to protocol. What do we do? She asked Eli, already knowing there were no good options left. Eli's face was grim but resolved. Whatever happens, don't let them take me alive. What I can do, they would weaponize it. Create more like me. Rhea nodded, understanding the implications. Then, making a decision that surprised even herself, she stepped forward into the clearing. Commander Varric, she called out, leaving Eli concealed in the tree line. I wish to speak. There was a moment of silence then. Approach slowly, arms visible. Rhea complied, walking steadily toward the center of the clearing, where she could now see the tactical unit positioned. 12 soldiers, all heavily armed, with Varric at their center. Where is the human? Varric demanded as she drew near. First, I want to know the charges against me, Rhea replied, keeping her voice steady. Varric's expression was cold. Desertion, aiding an enemy combatant, violation of the truce agreements. The penalty is execution. He's not the enemy, Rhea said, loud enough for all to hear. He survived what we wouldn't last a day in. He's a violator, Varric countered. He broke the truce by remaining in a restricted zone. The protocols are clear. He must be executed or remanded to Research Division. Rhea knew what that meant. Dissection, experimentation, a fate worse than death for someone like Eli. She made her choice then, reaching up to remove her helmet, the final symbol of her allegiance to a cause she no longer believed in. All life, by command, she thought. Forward, backward, fire. And now, I choose. She let the helmet fall to the ground with a dull thud. Then I'm a violator too. Varric's eyes narrowed. You'd walk away from everything? For him? No, Rhea replied, her voice stronger now. I'll stay with the one who didn't walk away when I fell. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Varric raised his hand, signaling his troops to take aim. Last chance, Rhea. Tell us where the human is, and you might yet live. But before she could respond, a strange stillness fell over the clearing. One by one, the soldiers began to lower their weapons, confusion evident on their faces. "What are you doing?" Varric demanded. "Maintain positions." "They can't hear you," came Eli's voice as he stepped out from the tree line. "And soon they won't see you either." As if on cue, a thick mist began to rise from the ground, enveloping the clearing in seconds. Not natural fog, something else, something controlled. "What is this?" Varric shouted, reaching for his sidearm as visibility rapidly diminished. "The other thing they developed in me," Eli explained calmly, walking toward Raya through the thickening mist. "Not just perception, projection, the ability to disrupt sensory processing in others." Raya watched in amazement as the soldiers stumbled about in confusion, unable to coordinate, unable to see or hear their commander's increasingly frantic orders. "We need to go," Eli said, taking her hand. "I can't maintain this for long." Together they slipped past the disoriented troops, moving quickly toward the edge of the clearing, opposite from where they had entered. Behind them, chaos reigned as the tactical unit fired blindly into the mist, their shots going wide, their coordination completely broken. They ran until the sounds of confusion faded behind them, until they reached a boundary marker indicating the edge of the restricted zone, the neutral ground beyond which neither her people nor the remaining humans had claim. "Will they follow?" Raya asked as they paused to catch their breath. Eli shook his head. "Not into neutral territory. The diplomatic consequences would be too severe. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "they can't track what they can't perceive." "Where do we go now?" Raya asked, looking out at the unfamiliar landscape stretching before them. "Forward," Eli said simply. "Not as fugitives, but as a new kind of survivor." 3 months later, rumors began to spread throughout the contested territories. Stories of safe passages appearing in the most dangerous dead zones, routes that circumvented patrols, avoided natural hazards, and led refugees safely to neutral ground. People called them the blind trails, for they were often impossible to see until you were already on them, and they were best navigated by those who trusted more than just their vision. Maps began to circulate among those seeking escape, showing one particular path marked with 12 distinct points. Each point was named after an arrow, not the projectiles themselves, but the constellations visible in the night sky above each location. Those who followed the blind trails spoke of guides who appeared when needed most. A blue-skinned woman with knowing eyes and a blind human man who moved like he could see the future unfolding before him. The fire crackled softly in the small clearing, its light casting long shadows against the surrounding trees. Raya sat with her back against a fallen log, watching the flames dance. Across from her, Eli tended to a pot of stew, his movements precise and efficient despite his blindness. Their camp was simple, a few weathered tarps strung between trees, bedrolls, and the essential supplies they needed for their work. Located on the edge of the neutral territory, it was close enough to the restricted zones to serve their purpose, yet far enough to provide some measure of safety. "They're late," Raya said, glancing toward the eastern edge of the clearing where the trail emerged from the dense forest. "They're coming," Eli replied calmly. "The mother is injured. They're moving slower than expected." Raya had long since stopped questioning how he knew such things. In the months since their escape, she had witnessed his abilities grow even stronger, his perception extending beyond the immediate surroundings to encompass vast stretches of the landscape. And she too had changed. The rigid military discipline that had once defined her had given way to a different kind of strength, one born of patience, of listening, of understanding the world in ways her training had never taught her. A soft rustling from the trees drew her attention. She rose smoothly, moving to the edge of the firelight as 3 figures emerged from the darkness. A tall human man supporting a limping woman, and between them, a small child, a girl no more than 7 years old. "Welcome," Raya said softly, careful not to startle them. The family froze at the sight of her blue skin, fear flashing across their faces. "It's all right," the man said to his family. "She's the one they told us about. The compass." Raya extended her hand slowly. "You're safe now. Come, rest. Eat." The woman hesitated, her grip tightening on her daughter's shoulder. The child, however, stared at Raya with open curiosity rather than fear. "Your eyes are pretty," the girl said suddenly, "like the sky before stars." Something warm and unexpected bloomed in Raya's chest. She knelt to the child's level. "What's your name?" "Mira," the girl replied. "Well, Mira, you have very good eyes," Rhea said. "Come, there's food and then rest. Tomorrow we'll take you the rest of the way." As the family settled around the fire, accepting bowls of the steaming stew, Eli moved to sit beside Rhea. "You did well," he said quietly. "They trust you now." "It's still strange," she admitted, "being trusted by those who once feared me." "That's the nature of change," Eli replied, "for them and for you." Later, after the family had fallen asleep in the shelter, Rhea and Eli sat together at the fire's edge, watching the embers glow. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Helping me that day at the ravine? Everything that came after?" Eli was silent for a long moment. "No," he finally said. "There was a purpose in it, in all of it." "And now? What's our purpose?" He smiled slightly. "The same as it's always been. To see clearly. To help others do the same." Rhea looked toward the sleeping child, Mira, whose face in repose held none of the fear or wariness that had marked so many refugees they had guided. "I'm not a soldier anymore," she said softly. "I'm a compass. But not pointing forward, pointing inward." Eli nodded, understanding what she meant without need for explanation. "That's the most important direction." As dawn approached, they prepared to move again. Another group would be arriving soon, and after that, they would guide Mira and her family to the settlement deeper in the neutral territory. Rhea watched as the first light filtered through the trees, illuminating the small clearing that had become their temporary home. There was still danger, still uncertainty in the path ahead. But for the first time since she could remember, there was also purpose. Not the cold duty of a soldier, but something warmer, truer. She was a compass now, guiding others not just to safety, but to a new way of seeing the world. And in doing so, she had found her own way through the darkness. And those who followed the blind trails carried with them a simple message. You didn't dodge, you knew. A reminder that survival wasn't about speed or strength or even sight. It was about perception, understanding, and sometimes the courage to walk a path you couldn't see until you were already on it.